Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is once again really wonderful to be here, and I thank you all for the invitation. When we come here, the same way as when we go to some other centers, we really feel at home, as we are in the same center we dedicate our lives to. So I feel at home. Today we're going to talk about a very important topic, and it kind of like talks about Spiritism as a whole, and this message we're trying to put forward and disseminate as a whole, and the meaning of the message, and why so many people, not only today, us reincarnated today, but so many people throughout history have given their time, their money, their energy, their lives to the dissemination of this message. When we mention terms or names such as Spiritism, what we're talking about, again, it's a collection of thoughts and ideas. These thoughts and ideas are not owned by Spiritism. They are universal concepts, universal ideas. They, at the same time that are disseminated here on earth, they're also disseminated in other places where people, where lives, where spirits are also in need of the same message, because it is a universal message based on universal laws. When we mention the name of Jesus in our talk, and when we mention the name of Kardec, Allan Kardec, we're also basing our mentioning and our thoughts in ideas that were disseminated by these individuals when reincarnated. In other words, they themselves do not own these ideas, and as they were here reincarnated in their past lives, in their past reincarnations on earth, disseminating these ideas, they themselves did everything they could to let people know that what they were disseminating were universal ideas, were divine laws, and these ideas were not of themselves. All of these ideas are also, of course, also disseminated, sometimes in a different way, sometimes in different words, but by many other creeds, religions, doctrines. They're not only disseminated in Spiritism. Some of them disseminate them as much as Spiritism does, some exactly the same way as Spiritism does, and some in the same collection of ideas as Spiritism does, and some less. But they're also disseminated by other doctrines and religions and creeds. All these ideas have been disseminated on earth for a long, long time, since men have been men, since our creation began on this earth. There's a lot of people who put a lot of work into them. We see that the ideas such as we talk now nowadays, disseminate through Spiritism, the main idea began way back when Socrates and Plato were alive, and when they began talking about the know thyself. In other words, they began giving the importance of our essence, our individuality, ourselves as individuals, our essence. Nothing on earth, nothing in the universe occurs or takes place by luck, by chance. Everything has a plan. In our lives, the major happenings in our lives were also planned. Before we reincarnated, we sat down with spiritual mentors, spiritual guides, who were capable of helping us planning our lives. And the same thing happens with the progression of the universe, the progression of planets, and the same thing happened with Earth's creation, the progression of Earth. Everything was planned, because when we talk about the mind and the perception of our spiritual benefactors, we of course know that they are much more capable spiritually and intellectually than we are. And and when we compare ourselves to them, materially speaking, when we in our lives, in our, let's say, monetary or economic lives, we plan things, right? If we want to buy a house, we plan to buy a house. If we want to retire, we plan to retire. So why would we think that they themselves would not plan a project such as the progress of a planet such as Earth? So they do plan it, and they plan it very well. The things that are happening to us right now are not just happening because they're happening. They're happening because they have been planned. Divinity has allowed for them to happen. So we can continue to progress, such as many other planets and globes have progressed throughout the history of the universe. One of the plans has been the dissemination of these divine ideas we're going to see here today. Beginning, like we said, way back then with Plato and Socrates talking about calling our attentions to our essence, know thyself. There is, as we study Spiritism, we know there is three major revelations. There is the revelation of the Mosaic laws, the Christian revelation as in when Jesus came, and the third major revelation, Spiritism, the ideas that Spiritism bring about. Before those and in between those, there are many smaller revelations, such as in when Socrates was talking about us knowing our essence. Right after Socrates, we see the first revelation come about. We see actually, one of the major revelations, Moses talking about also our essence. When does he talk about our essence? When he talks about and starts disseminating the 10 Commandments. How do we see, how do we read the 10 Commandments? How do they start when we read the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not this. Thou shalt not that, this and that, and this. So it is directly talking about what thou, should and should not be doing. So Moses, like Socrates, are both concentrating their messages on our essence, examining our essence. What should we as individuals, as spiritual beings, be doing or should not be doing according to the law of God? As we go on, we see Jesus, who comes and broadens this message even a lot bigger than we had ever heard about. He starts talking about how much this essence should do as far as to love others, love God, and love one another, the message of Jesus. Now, Jesus was so important because by then, he wasn't just talking about what this essence should be doing, the dynamics of this essence. He was talking about it, and at the same time, he was actually practicing it. He was showing that every single one of us could really practice this, the dynamic of this essence, which is the dynamic of love, which is what all of us are. This is our essence, the divine essence of love. That is how we were created. That is how God intended us for us to live our lives. Not only material lives, but our infinite spiritual lives. So Jesus was, according to the Spirit's book, the spirit or the individual who has ever reincarnated on earth, who was the most progressed spiritual being who has ever stepped on earth. It is one of the answers of the Spirit's book in regards to the question of who was Jesus. So Jesus, he disseminated this whole idea of love and practiced love in its completeness. Thus why one day he was talking to some people, as I am now, and somebody came to him and told him, your brothers and your mother are here to talk to you. And he asked them, who are my brothers and who is my mother? Now the lesson is very important because it wasn't only a lesson that he wanted to give us. It was really how he felt inside himself. It is really how spirits who are more progressed, more developed, who are in the happy or perfect state, and we're going to see a little bit of that later, how they perceive things. Because they don't see anybody different because of their color, their race, or in which family they were born, or from which country they were from. They love everybody in the same way because they themselves already practice this dynamic of their love essence. So if Jesus walked into here and he started meeting all of us, he would immediately love all of us, beings who are essence, the essence of creation, exactly the same way. He would sacrifice himself to help all of us exactly the same way as he would sacrifice himself for his mother, for his brothers, or for whoever he loved who was from his family. This is exactly how one day all of us will be. We're not going to love anybody or creation, parts of creation, differently from other parts or from other people or from other individual beings. This is exactly how we are going to be. So all this planning continues, and we're really going kind of like fast through our evolution, through our history here, so we can fit it all in 50 minutes. All this planning continues, and when we get to the years of 17-something or 18-something, we start seeing a big revolution takes place. And the revolution now is the revolution of taking all of this notion of the progress of our essence and the dynamics of our loving essence, and actually matching it with the scientific explanation of it. Because so far, nothing much had happened as far as us really changing ourselves, really looking into ourselves, and really practicing what some of these were preaching and what Jesus actually showed us we could practice, as when he said, you can do what I do and much more. Now this is such a powerful and incredible assertion. Because it was an assertion. He said that, didn't he? Why would Jesus, in his completeness, in his evolution, in his complete evolution as a spiritual being, say that to us? We're going to see that towards more at the end. But so far, we had not really believed that we could do what he told us we could do, and more than he did. So far we had not. Thus the planning continues to try to make us believe in that we should use the dynamic of love inside all of us. So we see now in this planning, in this evolution, the scientific minds reincarnated on earth and try to disseminate to us the reality, talk to us about our spiritual reality. So we have people like William Crookes, we have people like Camille Flammarion, like Victor Hugo. We have so many of these individuals, hundreds of these individuals in the literary, in the physics, in all kinds of scientific and famous people and popular people back then who started to analyze the communications who began happening with the table movements, with the mediumistic physical effects that started happening back then. Some of us even think they started with the Fox sisters. Some people think they started in Europe, but it doesn't matter. What matters is many people, because of these physical manifestations, many scientific minds began to study them. If we can think today of a scientific mind who is very popular, a scientist, who can we think of? Anybody? Einstein. Let's think of somebody who is incarnated right now. Stephen Hawking. Okay. There is also the man who just wrote a book with Stephen Hawking last year or a couple of years ago, which, by the way, is a book that it tries to tell people the universe did not need God to be created, which is, it's kind of crazy for us to even go there. But anyways, Stephen Hawking. Back then, in the 1800s, William Crookes, if we ask the same question to people, to a gathering of people, they would say William Crookes. He was clearly one of the greatest minds of that time. Crookes was the person who came out with the cathode rays. He studied electricity, and nobody knows how and why, he mixed electricity, the workings of electricity, with low pressure gases. With that, he observed that electricity kind of like glowed. The less pressure gases he had electricity going through, it glowed more. So he found the cathode rays, which is what we used for we used to use to our TVs with the tube TVs, that's what we use, green, red, and blue, the cathode rays, discovered by William Crookes. Nowadays we use plasma TVs, right? We don't use the cathode rays he discovered anymore. But we use plasma TVs, which plasma is the fourth type of matter that was discovered by William Crookes. Discovered plasma. William Crookes was also the first person to invent this instrument that could sense atomic energy as he started studying atomic energy. And the list just goes on and on and on. Crookes became very interested in the phenomena of table movements, and he started studying this phenomena, but he was very skeptical. He really didn't believe in anybody. Pretty much like, as far as his scientific research went, pretty much like Hippolyte Rivail Denizar. Very skeptical also. So he began studying this phenomena, And pretty soon he was inviting people to his home to see how these mediumistic meetings came about and to study this phenomena in his own home. But he was so skeptical that he only invited certain people he heard about, and he prepared his room in his house himself, and he waited for these people to get to his house at a certain time, and he waited outside his front door. When people got there, he would pat them down, he would check them and ask them questions, because he would allow them into his house. Once he allowed everybody in, he began his experiences of a very scientific mind and a very skeptical mind. Experiences such as asking a medium a question, standing behind where the medium was sitting, and asking questions such as, what word in the newspaper am I covering right now with my finger? The newspaper of that day. Without touching the medium, he would ask that, because he thought, if I touch him, he might read my mind or something, and without looking at the word, so he himself, Crookes, did not know what the word was. He, after some time, began experiencing the materialization of the spirit of Katie King. And for 2 years, he examined and experimented with this materialization of the spirit. And the spirit not only would, of course, talk to them, but would hug people, but would also allow for experiences to be done with this plasma or this ectoplasm body that made the spirit to be materialized. Crookes would even bring doctors to check the pulses of the spirit, which of course, if it's a spirit, it shouldn't have a pulse. It shouldn't have a heartbeat. So throughout 2 years, he compiled these experiences into 2 books, and he published the books. They're on Amazon.com, by the way, if you want to read it. And the scientific community back then labeled Crookes as a totally crazy person. After some time, he made other great discoveries, was given a scientific Nobel Peace Prize, and after receiving this prize, they asked him, Crookes, all these things you wrote about spirits and all that stuff, that was just you having like a momentary craziness in your life, right? And he said, absolutely not. I still sign off under everything I did, all the experiments I did, and all of those were true. Anyways, Crookes was one of them. We have Camille Flammarion, a very popular and well-known astronomer back then. Flammarion was educated by the person who discovered the planet of Neptune. So as he was growing up, he was such a genius that when he was 16 years old, he published his first scientific paper, which was 500 pages long. Anyways, Flammarion, Victor Hugo, anybody knows Victor Hugo here? Anybody watched Les Miserables yet? The new movie? Well, the movie is not really new. It's, of course, everybody knows it's a theater play, but it's probably the 4th or 5th Les Miserables movie that comes out. A wonderful, wonderful story. But Victor Hugo was the most influential educator or literary person or writer in France and in Europe in his time. A lot of the French educational system, even today, is based on Victor Hugo's work. And Victor Hugo was a spiritist. Unlike William Crookes, who was a spiritualist researcher, Victor Hugo wrote spiritist books in which we can read even today. So many other of these scientific minds came out examining the works and the words of the spirits and confirming the life in the afterlife. One of them was Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail. Our Allan Kardec in which who we have great respect. So Ippoliti, as he was 12 years old, he walks into a very important place. Let's go back a little bit so we can know exactly what this place was. At around 1790 something, I can't remember the exactly years of these things, at around 1790 something, there is a man, a very young man, who is very passionate about the literature of, skip my mind, about the literature of this wonderful philosopher. He's going to come back to me. Now, this philosopher, this French or Swiss philosopher, he talked about the importance of the individual in society. He wrote so many wonderful books talking about the necessity for democracy to work, because everybody should have an input on how their lives should go about in society. One of the books was The Social Contract. If anybody remembers his name, please help me out. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, thank you so much. So through the social contract, he explains how much the individual is important in society. Because a society could never work, individuals would never be happy when only one or a few would dictate the rules or would tell people what to do, such as in monarchies, such as in dictatorships. Rousseau was really the first really famous or popular individual to come out and disseminate this very idea. And it was very much hated by a lot of people back then because of it. Now, this young man was really very impressed by Rousseau's ideas. And he began studying Rousseau's ideas and works, but he also decided to do something about it. He decided to put into practice these ideas of dedicating his life into educating individuals and individualities with the same set of mind of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The name of this individual who started a school for poor children when he was about 22 years old was Pestalozzi. Anybody ever heard of Pestalozzi? I think so. If you study in the Spiritist Center, you have heard of him. Pestalozzi, who was the son of a brain surgeon doctor, had some money, and he started a school in a farm for poor children. For a long time, he dedicated his life to teaching those children. He helped them a lot, and he not only divulged the ideas of Rousseau, but he also implemented them in the classroom. As far as for the first time, a person who dedicated their lives to educating people, as far as to paying attention to the individuality of their students. Because back then, everybody saw a classroom as a whole bunch of people, and this whole bunch of people had to pay attention in what the instructor was writing on the board, and they would read a lesson and wouldn't really learn anything. They would just remember those things to take tests, and people were just treating as a bunch and never as individuals. And if anybody complained and didn't like, they just beat them up. That's pretty much it, including parents. So Pestalozzi was the first one to pay attention to the individual student. He was the first one to actually take students out of the classroom. When he wanted to talk to them about biology, he would take them to a field and show them a tree and show animals and show a lake. He was the first one to come up with teacher and parents meetings. As we know today, we even have teaching and parents associations. There was no such a thing back then. back then. He was the first one in the classroom to separate the classroom into groups, give them different projects so they can, amongst themselves, come up with an answer and present this answer and this project to the rest of the classroom. By then, Pestalozzi was already, after his first 2 schools, he had already founded the Pestalozzi Institute in Yverdon, Switzerland. By the way, in 2007, the Spiritist movement in Switzerland, they did a wonderful event, promoted a wonderful event at the Yverdon Castle, which today is just a place where people rent space to do events. So they rented a place there and did a wonderful event celebrating 150 years of the Spirits book. So in Yverdon, he kept on disseminating these ideas. And he also came up with what he called the Sandbox Method. This method, in which he built a sandbox, he would have many pieces of materials and different things in the sandbox, in which kids would, or students would play around it and with these materials, and he would talk about life in general and tell stories involved in these materials, a little horse, a little man, a little house, and these things made it much more interesting for students to learn. Now, these things may seem very, mundane and not important, but again, back then, that kind of thing just didn't happen. As a matter of fact, this Sandbox Method was also utilized by the U.S. government, and we found this by visiting the U.S. Department of Education website. They have pictures of the Sandbox Method being used in the western of the United States back then in the 1900s to teach the Navajo Indians to learn English. So they would play with the sandbox, hold a horse, and the teacher would tell them, horse, and so on and so forth. Pestalozzi also dedicated a great part of his life at the Yverdon Institute into telling parents they should be very participant in the education of their own kids, and they should put a lot of love into this education. Love and education just were not a match back then. So Pestalozzi was the first one to implement that into the classroom, especially by himself sitting down with kids and with the kids' parents and talking about even difficulties they were having at home. Now, it just goes on and on and on of the beauty this individual had inside of him. It's like a whole other talk just on Pestalozzi. The important thing is that when he was 12 years old, this individual, or before he named himself Allan Kardec, Hippolyte Léon Denisard, walks into the Pestalozzi Institute in Yverdon to study there as a student. And in one of his books, Neo Lucio tells us how this dialogue goes about. It's a dialogue that lasts about 2 pages. Pretty much, they recognized each other. It's like one of the most dialogues I have ever read in my life. They recognize each other as spiritual friends. Allan Kardec immediately tells Pestalozzi, as Pestalozzi asks him, what exactly do you want from our institute? And he immediately tells him, I want to learn how to educate people so they can, as we have been talking about here, so they can develop their inner self, their loving persons that they are and that we all are. 2 years later, when he was 14 years old, Allan Kardec was already helping Pestalozzi teach classes at the Yverdon Institute. So that's exactly where Allan Kardec, or how this individual was prepared and educated to bring about Spiritism to earth, okay? bring about Spiritism to work? Through these messages, through the message of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, through the message of Pestalozzi, of the importance of the individual. The Spiritist message not only talks about this importance, but it also talks about, it opens up a big window for us to understand this importance through some very main principles. What are the basic principles of Spiritism? First one, when we start reading the Spirit's book, God. Second one, anybody remembers? You can help me out if you want. The people from the systematic study of Spiritism. God. Second one, immortality of the soul. We live forever. The third one, anybody? Anybody? Especially the ones who drank coffee. When I got here, I saw you drinking coffee. The third one, reincarnation. As they name it, plurality of our existences. Fourth one, communications with spirits. Communication with the other world, with the other side, with spirits. And the last one, the plurality of worlds, or our homes. Every globe is inhabited somehow, right? Now, when we go through these basic principles, we find in them a consoling factor. Consoling factor. In other words, now, not only we know we have to develop our essence, but we know that we do this in stages. We take steps. And when we commit an error, when we commit a mistake, these basic principles, when we study each one of them, tells us you are a spiritual being who are progressing. So don't look at what you did in the past. Just do better the next time around. When we go through every single one of this, the concept of a God who is a loving God, who is a father, who sees us as his children, who gives us many, many chances, plurality of existences, many chances to better ourselves. Through immortality, we have infinity to become perfect spirits. Through the communication of the spirits, we get consolation from them. We get instruction from them. Through the plurality of worlds, as we read in the Spirit's book, and they have a wonderful term because we're always talking about emigration and immigration. Through here in the Spirit's book, we study the transmigration of spirits. Spirits who reincarnate from one planet that is more progressed to one that is less developed spiritually to help us, such as in the case of Jesus, who didn't need to reincarnate here, transmigrated here to help us. Such as in the case of spirits who are living in planets who are less progressed, but they get to visit worlds that are more progressed, so they get to know these worlds and bring the message to us to tell us, you know, this is what a happy world is. This is what a perfect world is. Such as in the case of some of the literature, such as the mother of Chico Xavier, who through a book called, translated to Letters from a Dead Woman, tells us about the life in Neptune, about the life in Mars, which is a much more progressed planet than on Earth. Through the literature of the Brother X, who also tells us about the life in Mars, which is a very more progressed life than our life is. So all of these basic principles have a wonderful and consoling factor. Consoling factor. This consoling factor also goes on with literature that came about way after not only what we call the precursors of Spiritism, such as we were talking about William Crookes, but also after the 5 main books of Spiritism, literature such as the books from Emmanuel, such as the books of Joanna DeAngelis. Joanna DeAngelis is the epitome of the teaching and of education of us regarding the essence, the loving essence that we are. And she explains exactly what this individual Jesus did when he was here as far as practicing this total and complete love goes. And we ask ourselves, what exactly is love? So we can finish our explanation. What exactly is love? What was that Jesus was doing here, loving each other? But what was that, really? Because we say we love people a lot. I love you, I love this, I love that. But do we exactly know what love is? Joanna DeAngelis, through her literature, she comes and explains to us exactly what love is. And love is not just one thing. Love is many things. Some of us love more and less according to our wish or want to love more and less. We can put more power into love and less power into love. And she dissects love into the many virtues that we all have and that we all are. Virtues such as, what are some of the virtues? Some of the virtues that we can come up with. Tolerance, patience, compassion, charity, and she has about 30 of them that she explains as far as love goes. So these virtues we can use as much as we want to use because they're all in us. Every single one of these virtues are in us. Does the saying, you can do what I do and a lot more? Because he knew that his essence was made up as these virtues. And our essence is the same, also made up of all these virtues. So the more compassionate I want to be, the more compassion I want to exercise, the more I will exercise. We don't have to wait 300 reincarnations. We don't have to go live in some other planet. We don't have to wait 300 billion years to begin utilizing the virtues that make up love. We can use them now. We can use them now. So this is an important key that Spiritism holds to open up the door so we can really understand the practice of love that Jesus showed us. The key to understand that if we want to be more patient, we can just choose right now to be more patient. And the more these virtues we use, and the more we use these virtues on our everyday lives, one day we will be able to really disseminate our dynamic essence of love constantly like Jesus did, because he practiced and utilized these virtues that are in him and that are all inside of us right now constantly. That's what he did, and that's what Spiritism tells us constantly. You can do this now. You don't have to wait unless you want to. Thus, the answer in the Spirit's book that tells us that some spirits progress faster, some progress slower, according to how much work they put into their progress. The same thing with some planets, as in Mars, who the Spirits tells us, they never had any problems as far as wars go, as far as killing each other goes, not even as killing animals to eat goes, or to preserve their material life goes, because they decided since their beginning to be a peaceful planet, since their beginning. So it is all about how much we want to put into our own progress and our own loving essence, so we can practice love in general and constantly and completely. Okay? Thank you for your attention. Thank you.